What's up, everybody? I'm back, and it is Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, the evolution of the American horror film. And that is exactly what this does. Documents the evolution from some of the earliest stuff, like the Universal Monsters stuff, all the way through the 60s, 50s, the sci-fi stuff of the 50s, through the 60s, and then into the 70s when it got a little bit more hard, and 80s and 90s, and all the way up through now, which is remakes and stuff like that. Excuse me. It has interviews with John Carpenter, Mick Garris, Joe Dante, Larry Cohen, George Romero, Roger Corman, Darren Lynn Bousman, and Brian Usna. And there's also one in there, very small little snippet of Tony Timpone from Fangoria. It mainly focuses on the more mainstream horror films, which I guess in the context of the film makes sense to an extent. Since it is about, you know, the evolution of the horror film through other horror films and events of the times, cultural and social climates of the times to influence the films. So in that context, yes, it does. But I think there were a few films that they did not mention that were probably pretty influential. But overall, I get why they did what they did. Not a lot, honestly. If you're a big horror fan, there's not a lot of information in this that's going to be new to you. And honestly, in my opinion, it's kind of flat. Documentaries, depending on the subject matter, you either have to have amazing editing and amazing pace, or extremely compelling footage. Now, something like this, which is about a genre film, they're not exposing the atrocities of whatever, so you're not going to have like new compelling footage, of whatever. It needs to be edited correct, and go at a pace that is quick and you not get bored. I'm not saying that the pace was bad. It moved along at a good pace. It's just if you're a rabid horror fan, there's not going to be a whole lot in here that you don't already know, you haven't already heard of. And it just has this sort of flat feeling. After a while, you're kind of left bored. I don't know how else to explain it. It becomes monotonous, to be honest. And maybe that's just because a lot of the information in here is, stuff I've heard before. It's nothing new. It just got to a point where I just found it kind of boring and flat, and it's very timeline-ish, events. I mean, they do try to pretty much tell you how we got from point A to point B in how long is this? Hour and a half. That's a pretty big time span, and a pretty big subject to try to cover in an hour and a half, so you would figure that it would be pretty entertaining and fast-paced. I think it was fast-paced, I guess. I think it's just the subject that they were tackling and the exact subject, the evolution of the horror film, not anything else per se. And I guess the way it was presented, it's presented in a way where it's sort of clips of certain films, people talking about those movies, why they think that those movies were the way they were at that time. Move on. Same thing. It's a very set formula, repeated, 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 repeated. And by the end of it, or by the middle of it, you're kind of like, okay, can we change up the formula here or something? I don't know. It just got to a point where I was very bored. And again, it could just be because I've heard this information before. Maybe for people, I've seen other documentaries like it. There's another one that's not quite as long and doesn't do it in the format that this one does, but it's called American Nightmare. But it's the same sort of subject but the way that they do it is they analyze certain films throughout that they felt were influential and showed a sign of the times. And they did sort of the same thing as in, why was this movie the way it was? Well, it was because of, the Vietnam War and the way that people were feeling at that time, and They do the same thing in this. It's just very short, and, that I think that was a much better way in American Nightmare to, I think, do what these people were trying to do, except they tried to do the whole thing. Let's go from the beginning and to the end in an hour and a half, and it's just sort of like, well, that's probably why they did the formula the way they did, because they had to stick to a formula to get through this whole thing. Whereas the people in American Nightmare chose, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 horror films to go over and analyze a little bit more thoroughly. The ones that they felt were sort of game changers that did progress the evolution of the horror film. Movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, Halloween, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. I can't remember. I haven't seen it in a while. But yeah, I think that was probably a better thing to tackle than like trying to tackle the entire timeline of the horror film, because then you do have to stick to this formula, and it got boring. So if you've never seen anything like it, if you've never really researched or thought about why certain films at certain times are the way they are, then you might find this very informative and enjoyable. I just thought it was a lot of the same information, and yeah, somewhat boring. So features, 0, nothing, nada, nothing, absolutely. I don't even think there's a trailer on here. So Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. If you haven't seen very many horror film documentaries, you might find this interesting and informative. If you've seen a bunch, this is just the same stuff you've listened to before, and you might just want to go ahead and avoid it and rewatch Going to Pieces or American Nightmare or something like that. Within the next 3 days, we will have the Nightmares 30th Anniversary Edition review and American Grindhouse, which I'm looking forward to. So, yeah. We will see you then. Like there's somebody else here. I don't know. You guys have a good day.